what I think is really disturbing is that we see these large events like South by Southwest, like the NBA, like these big events that will bring large crowds together. We see those being canceled. However, we don't see public schools in New York being canceled because the New York school system feeds 100,000 unsheltered students daily. And therefore, if they cancel school, those unsheltered children will not have access to food. And that doesn't even include the tens of thousands of children or youth, rather, that may have shelter but not access to 3 meals a day. So I think that's an incredible topic to talk about.
Well,
Is
and
that
I think
we see these larger things being canceled, but we have to maintain a public school system here so that children can get food.
well, and it's even goes beyond that because let's face it, public schools have turned into daycare centers, and I don't mean, to speak about it in a derogatory sense, but one of the things that they talked about is if these kids can stay home, then parents have to stay home, and
Yeah.
parents work, and some of these people even work in the medical profession. So there's a again, the implications of children not going to school. And look, and I'm not saying it's wrong to keep schools open. I know that there's got to be some sort of formula to figure out the cost benefit analysis. Not just cost, but I mean, not just financial cost, but the cost to human health and that kind of stuff. There's a lot of homeless children. And frankly, the most stable part of their lives are the 6 or 7 hours they're in a school building. So, look, I understand it, but what it does, and I think to your point, it points out how much of this system is so flawed and flawed for for reasons that go well beyond what we can wrap our heads around. This current event right now is showing the flaws and the weaknesses in everything. We'll talk about stock market, crashing. Right now, I mentioned to Reggie before we went on the air that the stock market right now is at the same level as it was in March of 2017. So all 3 years of Trump's presidency has been wiped out, and he's done nothing but boast about the strength of his economy. I still hear people trying to say the economy is strong and that kind of stuff. And yet you look at the vulnerabilities of this thing, not just the impacts of international trade, due to China and other countries who are facing some of this stuff. But the whole system is so flawed. And I've warned for years about the potential crash because of climate change, because of economic overextension, because of political unrest, global conflicts, and not just in the Middle East, but elsewhere, and the social unrest, the level of racism. I never even threw into the mix a pandemic.
Yeah, I think that I was reading about different reactions to Corona to prepare for this show, and a lot of people were criticizing this administration for making it all about the economics and not considering the larger health hazard. And that when we do, like even last night when President Trump did talk to the country, it was all about the economy.
Yep.
Don't worry, the economy will be okay. Like, we need to protect ourselves, but we must protect the economy. And I was so disturbed because it really, really showed to me that this is about capitalism. It's not about protecting the public. It's definitely not about protecting brown and black folks. That's not the consideration here. It is specifically about how are we going to tackle Corona in terms of maintaining the economy.
Well, I mean,
it goes 9/11. Incredibly disturbing.
9/11. I mean, what was George Bush? He said, the best thing everybody could do is go out and shop. I mean, he literally, forget about the fact that you've got, however you view the whole 9/11 crisis. There were people who died. I mean, and you had New York City's two largest buildings in the financial district, impacting everybody's lives. I'm not even talking about the financial issues. I'm talking about the lives. I mean, people who are still dying today because of some of the effects of breathing in that dust and that kind of stuff. And
Absolutely.
George Bush's biggest, his recommendation to not let the terrorists win was to go out and shop. Crazy.
Well, nothing says, fighting back against terrorism and germs like going out and shopping. Truly. I think that it's been, I rely on doing a lot of my work at colleges and universities and at event spaces because I do a lot of lectures, and all of them have been canceled. I mean, for a good reason. We don't want to spread the contagion. However, this is a financial burden for me. I can't even imagine the financial burden that this is going to cause on folks who work in retail, who are expected to still show up and sell to other people in order to maintain this quote unquote strong economy.
It goes
that's
beyond
crazy. That's ludicrous.
It goes beyond economy, because when you're talking about, economy is like the macro, right? You look at it and in the total, but we're talking about individual people's lives. I mean, like I said, even when you get down to kids getting a good meal or two in school, the way this is disrupting everything and impacting everything, and I don't think it's an overreaction. I don't think we're being dealt a straight hand on some of the details associated with it. There's some things that I don't understand, and one of the things I'm going to say flat out, I don't understand how New York, the state that has the most of these cases, over 200 now, New York hasn't had a single death. Now, I'm not saying that they should have, but doing the numbers, there's something that's strange there. So what's different about getting the coronavirus in the state of New York or in New York City and that kind of thing? Versus, I mean, there's been at least one death in New Jersey already. I mean, that's right there. But so there's some strange things that are going on. There's mixed messaging about the numbers and the mortality rate. Some of the numbers, if you look at the numbers in total, it sounds like it's 3.5% of those who get, so if 1,000 people, 34 people will die. I mean, that's the way it looks. But then you want people to try to smooth it over. Say, well, it's probably not that high because we're not testing a lot of people. Well, that's true, but you're also not attributing other deaths to this too. I mean, so when people say, well, if we did testing, we might find there's a lot more people with the cases, so the mortality rate would go down. I say, but you also may have misassigned the cause of death to a bunch of people over the last 3 months as well. So the numbers and the way that people are trying to almost debunk the numbers, and I'm talking about government officials. I mean, what did Trump say? Again, I hate to quote him, but he said, "Oh, I believe the number's far less than 1%." Based on what? He said because he has a hunch about these things. Are you freaking kidding me?
Like I said, anything he says is just inaccurate. There's nothing to back it up. There's, I hate that he isn't any. A, I hate that he exists at all. B, I hate that people have to turn to him in order to get information about this. Because honestly, we're getting more information from social media. Earlier today, a couple of people who are in Italy posted on Facebook the realities of what it looks like for them to be in Italy and what could happen in the United States. And I found that post more useful than anything that the administration is putting out. But I also, not to in any way support this administration, I also wonder how much of this is fear-mongering and how much of this is reality. And that's upsetting to know that I personally can't access information that's honest. That there isn't enough, whether it's data or whether it's people who are reporting the actual news versus how their opinions. Like, I can't access information that's useful, and that's terrifying. Am I safe? Am I not safe? Is my family safe? Are they not safe? Like, what is the reality here?
Well, and beyond not being able to access it, we live now in a time where we have to be cynical with everything that we hear. I mean, and so cynical. Mm-hmm. I mean, like I said, we know you almost have to dismiss what the President of the United States says. I mean, the idea that we live in this world, that's the condition that we have, that we find ourselves in, is really, really. I'm not saying that we've ever lived at a time where everybody had just great trust in politicians, but in times like this, you want to have some sense that people have a sense for what's going on, but the mixed messaging, the fact that this guy wiped out most of the CDC before and any kind of staffing to handle any future pandemic is just absurd beyond. I mean, even some of the Republicans look like they're turning on him a little bit, but he goes on television last night and just demonstrates not only his inability to read, but I mean, he went on specifically to try to give confidence to the financial markets, and then the stock market dumped another 2,000 points. I mean, this guy's failure is incredible.
The stock market.
No, but I'm saying that even when he tries to do that, it fails. So look, I'm going to tell you right now, I don't care how many people I piss off. I've been hoping for the stock market crash for years, because for me that's the 1%, making money off of everybody else. And I'll tell you the other thing, that Trump's huge tax break. It went into a lot of these companies not investing in employees or expanding job creation or anything else. All they did is they took that money and they put it in one pocket, and then they put it and then they shifted to the other pocket. All the stock buybacks where companies bought the stock options that their CEOs had, which pumped up the price of the stock, and then by pumping up the price of the stock, their CEOs got more bonuses. The whole thing is such a scam that watching this thing crash. Look, that's the only positive thing that comes out of this thing.
Absolutely. The fall of capitalism. Who knew?
Yeah, who knew?
It was now. We've just been wanting it for so long.
Well,
I think that there's a couple things that I want to touch on, because I think that we could have a good conversation about it. And one of the first things is how the Indigenous community is reacting to Corona, because I think that there are so many different reactions. And then I also want to make sure that we talk about the racism that is happening in relation to Corona. But I've been seeing a lot of things, especially on social media, from the Indigenous communities who are like, "Oh, we've survived worse. We've done this before," and I felt like that was a little it was romanticizing something.
Yeah.
And I wanted to quote what the Kit info shop put out earlier today. They're an info shop based on Diné Ta, which is Navajo land, and they posted they posted earlier today, and it's on their Twitter, and it says, "Native Twitter needs to stop romanticizing the quote we've survived worse end quote narrative and hop on the quote we demand an end to capitalism and its failures end quote movement. COVID-19 is a wave of injustice and genocide for all poor, displaced, and dispossessed people."
Well, and that
really stuck with me.
To that point, anybody who wants to brag about our survival of smallpox or influenza, we didn't survive very well. I mean, some of the mortality rates that our people experienced were incredible, and some of it was intentional. I mean, without getting into a whole story about Lord Jeffrey Amherst giving out, suggesting issuing smallpox blankets. Even beyond that, look, part of the reason that our survival rates were so low on some of these diseases, it wasn't just because we didn't have a strong enough immune system to these filthy diseases that the Europeans brought. Our conditions were weakened by some of the stuff that the policies that Europeans were putting Native people through. I mean, starvation and slavery and all of that stuff. There's a reason that we were a healthier people than the Europeans who came here. There's a reason that our survival rates were so low. So no, I'm not going to brag about. I'm not going to romanticize the fact that we lost 90% of our populations to some of these.
Absolutely.
I think that's a big mistake. Now, I will say there is a certain irony, and I did post a meme. And look, I don't want to make light of this, but when to watch the president of the United States get up there and talk about stopping Europeans from coming to the United States because of bringing disease to this land. Yeah, there's an irony from a Native perspective to that, and you can't get around that. I've got a friend of mine, Jack Ahostein. For those of you who don't know Jack Ahostein, he is this great cartoonist in Navajo territory. Puts out cartoons for the Navajo Times, and he's done a couple of cartoons for me. But I said, there's certainly got to be a cartoon in there somewhere along the line that shows Native people trying to give white people blankets at this point, and just looking at and there's a cartoon in there someplace, and I'll leave it to him to take it from there.
We've been waiting for a travel ban from Europe since 1492. Let's be honest.
Exactly.
I've been waiting for this moment all my damn life. And of course, again, not to make light of the situation, but also like, y'all get off our land. This is it. This is the moment. I did see, I did want to share this. I was wondering if I should share this, but I did want to share this in relation to, we're talking about the smallpox blankets and Indigenous reactions to Corona. And one of the things that was happening when we announced that our collective was going to be at South by Southwest is that we got an influx of hate crimes, trolling, and bullying on our Instagram and on our social media. And one of the things that was sent to us was that someone said that they would show up at our panel at South by Southwest and give us blankets covered in Corona.
Jeez, yeah, there you go.
And it was such a. I mean, of course, that's just horrible. That's just rude and that's just racist. But also the fact that this is not new.
Right.
That diseases have been weaponized against Indigenous and Black communities and disabled communities and the queer community for a long time.
Oh yeah, I mean, look at obviously the AIDS epidemic and the failure to act on that was, and the racist and sickening comments that people shared during that time. Look, and every time something like this happens, there's a certain segment of the society that's going to say, "Well, I hope it wipes out them." It's always the other, right?
Of course. And, we've seen an influx of violence against the Asian and Asian American community here in New York and elsewhere. But a number of people have been beaten up and told, oh, you're a carrier, you're a corona, all these horrible things against people. And it's just it's incredible to me that in times of panic, that rather than there are movements of solidarity, that there is, in fact, larger rifts.
Well, and that's what you see. Every one of these viruses or diseases that come out, you still got folks on Fox News calling it the Chinese coronavirus because they want to assign blame. Some of the epidemics that came out of Africa, they want to, but they won't talk about how many plagues came out of Europe. And
of course not.
And that was, some of those were directly attributed to lifestyle choices and the filth and the way they manage sewage and that kind of stuff. I mean, there's no question about some of that. But it's easy for countries to look at, or it's easy for people in this country, white folks in particular, to look and blame Africans or to blame South Americans for Zika or to blame China for coronavirus. But they won't look at what this capitalistic system has done to give all of these things the legs that they have.
Of course. They're also not considering that these diseases are weaponized. This is not, we talked about this earlier, John, and saying that, we don't want to be pushing any sort of conspiracy or anything like that when talking about this. And I agree, but I also need people to know that this is, diseases have been weaponized purposefully throughout history. There is enough historical narrative that exists to prove and to show that this has been done. And coronavirus, I believe, is no different. And rather than seeing, these overt letters of pox blankets being handed to Indigenous folks, we see capitalism. Capitalism is the negative trajectory, and all it does is bring down the workers and Black and brown folks within that to be the most targeted by diseases,
and the least,
that is
and the
done
least
purposefully.
The least helped. I mean, that's
of course.
And that's the other side to this whole thing. And look, whether this disease is an engineered, and I don't necessarily believe that, but it doesn't mean that something that occurred naturally doesn't still get weaponized in a certain way, or get used.
That's my point.
Right, and so when you hear some of the conversations, there's that's okay, it's going to do this or it's going to do that, and you have to, at some level, you've got to attribute some of the poor response by the United States, and I'm not even just picking on the Republicans here. I mean, but the poor response by the United States to this disease, as there may have been a reasoning to not responding, and that's why we do have to hold people accountable. I mean, but I don't want to get too far off talking. I do want to understand how this is impacting. I mean, there's talk about the subway being shut down. There's talk. I mean, I don't know how this is going to impact people. Not just. I don't know how badly this is going to impact people, and there's no way to put a handle on this thing completely. I mean, here's the other thing that's happening, and again, I don't want to make light of it, but spring break, right? There are people through not just now, but through April, who, basically this is the time of year that people travel with their families. I have a trip planned, and I don't think it's going to happen. I mean, because, part of the reason, and I'm going to tell you, part of the reason I didn't go to, decided to not go to New York anymore, at least for the time being, it's twofold, or threefold actually. Obviously, there's always the risk that I could get sick, but honestly, that was the lower concern. The concern that I've got two people who live in my household who have COPD. So the idea of me bringing it back, I mean, this isn't about just saying, well, I don't have to worry about it. I'm in good health and I'm not that old. Yeah, but that's not the point. The point is you're spreading this thing to people who are, that may have underlying conditions. And the other thing that concerned me was the idea that I could somewhere between here and New York get caught up in some sort of a quarantine situation and then be separated from my family for 14 to 26 days. So, those were the considerations. So now you think about these people going on vacations. I mean, one of the things that people said was, if you're going to go on a vacation, you better account for the fact that you could in all likelihood have yourself tied up for another 14 to 26 days because of something like this. So go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, my partner had a flight to Amsterdam last night, 10 p.m. and it was announced at 9 or like 9:04, whatever, that the European travel ban would go into effect on Friday. And he ended up not going because once he tries to come back from Amsterdam in a week or so, he would not be allowed to come back.
Right.
It was just like an incredible moment to just start to realize that, like, where are we in this? Like, what is happening? We have to begin reconsidering our entire structure of travel, even for vacation. Okay, that's not it's not necessarily necessary, quote unquote.
Right.
What does it look like to go and come back? And I wonder if people are going to continue to travel. I mean, obviously with the European travel ban, it's going to be a little more difficult. But will people continue to travel? And is that a good thing or a bad thing? What is it a risk, or are people just moving on with their lives as usual?
Well, and I think the idea of moving on with your lives as usual, that is not going to happen. At some point, everybody has to take some of this stuff into consideration. Obviously, some people are going to be impacted in much bigger ways than others. But I think as this thing continues, we're all going to see significant impact. But having said that, there's always going to be those people who just absolutely reject. I mean, look, even as this thing was playing out, you saw Trump going out and shaking hands around people. He was the most hesitant to not want to do his Trump rallies and that kind of stuff. And you have people, and I'm not blaming the right or the left specifically. There are people who are going to reject the notion that they should stay in place, that they shouldn't travel, they shouldn't go to large gatherings. There are people who are going to absolutely reject those recommendations and do it anyway. And so. And again, I'm not suggesting that martial law needs to be declared. I mean, and I know the National Guard issue in New Rochelle has that sense, that sound to it. Although, I don't think it's armed guards shooting people trying to cross a barrier. That's not the way I understand their deployment. But look, this, I did a show a few weeks ago in New York. I talked about the dystopian future is now. I mean, when you look at all of the things that are looming, again, the nationalism, the racism, the economic, or the wealth disparity, the income disparity gap, again, the global conflicts, and I've said this before, the risk from a global economy standpoint isn't Wall Street. The risk is that there are so many companies, and so much of the economy is being fed by lines of credit, that when things start to fail, those lines of credit tighten up, and all of a sudden you realize that companies don't have the operating capital. So large employers, and I'm not talking about CEOs now. I'm talking about employers who are operating on lines of credit to even make payroll, that kind of stuff. This is a huge deal, because, like I said, I didn't even factor in disease as one of those things that could tip the scale on so much of this stuff. I mean, and I'm not just talking economics here. This is the kind of stuff that can feed a frenzy of violence. Not just racially or within some place like the United States or Canada, but globally. This is the kind of stuff that could feed the level of anger and angst that could blow this thing up.
You know what? I think we have more to discuss on this. We are at the bottom of the hour, so let's take a little break, and then we will come back and continue with this conversation. So yeah, we'll be right back. Give us a second. All right, y'all, welcome back. John, we still got you?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Great, wonderful. Reggie and I were just talking, and something that I wanted to bring up that is in relation to all of this is the impact that this has had on Chinatown here in New York. And of course, there are Chinatowns in a lot of large cities, and all of them are seeing this impact of people just avoiding the area. And that's just racism. That's really all it is. And I wanted to urge people who are listening to continue, without putting themselves at risk and being in public in general, to continue to support our communities that are going to be the most targeted at this time. So don't forget, order that Chinese food. I did last night. There is no need to use fear as a means to perpetuate racism.
Right, and I think it's really important that this is about not just about traveling at this point. This is about us trying to do. I hate to sound trite, but there's basic things that we can all do. Obviously we wash our hands more often. I gotta tell you, as we're doing the show, I must have touched my face 10 times already, and so the idea of not touching your face is pretty difficult. I mean, you've got to, but try to wash your hands, try to disinfect surfaces. I mean, one of the things that is kind of clear is that this virus wants to lodge itself in your lungs. And so if it gets on your hands and then you touch your mouth or whatever else. One of the other recommendations I heard that was good is people always say drink lots of water, but one of the things that water also does, if you should happen to get the virus in or about your mouth, drinking that would flush it into your digestive system where the virus does not survive. The virus wants to be inhaled. It wants to get in your lungs. That's its goal, right? If it could have an intelligent intent, that's where it wants to go. So, drink lots of water and drink it, not just lots at one time, but drink often. Drink, rinse your mouth out. Drink, drink often. Wash your hands, and you know what? Try to avoid large, crowded places. And there are a lot of things you can still do socially and interact socially that doesn't necessarily place you at risk. But I got to tell you, the first case in the Rochester area was announced this morning, and this was a guy who he didn't just travel to New York, but he rented a car and drove back from New York. So there's a decent indication that whoever rented the car before him may have left the virus on surfaces that and 8-hour drive or 6-hour drive from New York back to Rochester may have been part of the issue. So. Again, there's a lot of things we can try to do without necessarily being, nerdy germophobic, I guess. But do the things you can do. I mean, try to practice not just personal hygiene, but clean things around you and that kind of stuff. I mean, But here's the other thing: if you are mixing yourself in a lot of company, this may be the time not to visit your grandparents. This may be the time that you give that a little bit of a rest. And and although children and babies are said to be more resistant to becoming terribly ill, I still wouldn't handle infants. And I would definitely stay away from people who have underlying conditions, breathing conditions. I mean, and it's not just respiratory issues, because any of these viruses. Look, one of the things, and I was listening to this program about this, and they're saying, look, the people in China who were most at risk were older men. And part of it is because older men, even if they didn't have underlying, known underlying conditions, older Chinese men smoke a lot. And they smoke in a much greater rate than women. And that's why women of the same age were not perceived to be as high a risk as men who. So they were talking about this whole idea of underlying conditions. Well, I'll tell you, anybody who thinks that Americans are robust and healthy, they probably haven't looked in the mirror. I mean, because the obesity epidemic, so much of the we're not even getting into mental health, but I'm talking about breathing conditions, diabetes, all of these underlying conditions. Some of the terrible things that we consume with as for food have deteriorated things like liver and kidney. The alcohol consumption. There are a lot of reasons that people have to understand that even if you don't think you have an underlying condition, you're probably not factoring in some of the bad health that most Americans have. So this is something that we really should take into consideration when we're talking about who we visit. By all means, call your grandmother. Check in with her. I mean, if social media is one of the ways that you can stay in touch without necessarily having to touch. So that's among the things that I think we have to take into consideration. Obviously, don't visit nursing homes and try to limit the amount of contact. And I'll tell you, the other personnel that you probably don't want to spend a great deal of time with are medical personnel, because those medical personnel, and I'm not saying be unfriendly, and I'm not saying don't be appreciative for what they do, but let's face it, sick people go to the hospitals. And for very good reason. So some of the people who are exposed to have the highest exposure rate to some of these things are people who work in hospitals. So I will
say that I'm going to. Sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. I'm just saying that these are some common sense things that we may not normally think of. That and there are others. And frankly, when we go to the phone lines, anybody who's got other suggestions, I'd like to hear them, because I think people have to think about some of these things.
I will say that I'm going to disagree with you in the sense that the idea of health being in any way related to weight, because being, quote unquote obese or being fat or being, in any of these terms that are used, it has nothing to do with health, and often is just inherent fat phobia that causes people to feel that being overweight is linked to being unhealthy. So I will disagree with that, because I think that kind of terminology and rhetoric is actually incredibly harmful for those who are different, who have different bodies. And but I do agree with what you're saying in relation to don't like people with autoimmune deficiencies, or your grandparents, or folks who are going to be more susceptible. Of course, avoid that, but at the same time, I think this is an interesting conversation, because as we're talking about, don't go to large gatherings, we are actually we're hosting an action in solidarity with Wet'suwet'en tomorrow, at the Canadian consulate, because even though this is happening, there is still a call from Wet'suwet'en land and people to show solidarity tomorrow. So I wonder how this will affect our direct action moving forward, because even though there is, a fear of spreading contagion, we cannot stop showing up for our kin who are still being violently arrested, and who have their land being threatened to be taken away from them. And I wonder, what does direct action look like in a time where people are avoiding going out? Should we be focusing more on social media? What kind of education tools can we have? And I wonder what that will look like. And it's something that we're focusing on as a collective right now, is how do we do direct action when we can't be in the streets?
Well, and I guess one thing I want to make real clear is that if you are going to participate in something like this, and if you're not feeling well, you might want to think about it. I mean, look, if you are showing any signs, then you should. I mean, I know self-quarantine sounds extreme, but you shouldn't mingle with people if you're coughing, if you're sneezing, if you're
Absolutely.
if you're short of breath and those kinds of things. I mean, these are, again, some of the common sense things. Now, I do agree that we all have to get along and figure out what we do day to day in terms of our lives, and there are certain calculations we have to make about what, not just, and it isn't just about risk factors, but I guess it is some of that. But so no, I absolutely hear what you're saying, and I think we do have to make sure that we fulfill responsibilities and obligations, and we do need to, look at if you are committed to a cause, you've got to balance out how much you're going to let that cause suffer, as you're trying to, as you're trying to look after, public health and that kind of stuff. So I agree with you on the Wet'suwet'en thing, just because you brought it up, and I want to. There's still a lot of confusion over that, and I don't know how much I know you've been following it pretty closely, but you have factions there, not just band councils, which are essentially the recognized governmental officials in some of these territories that oftentimes are in the pocket of provincial and Canadian federal governing systems. But you also there was a group that was calling themselves matriarchs, who basically have taken money from some of the gas line companies, and they've tried to take a position against the hereditary chiefs. Now, just calling a group of matriarchs doesn't mean that they are the women, like Frida and others who have been on the front lines of this thing. But this is some of the confusion. So you do have people, and I heard that one group that calls themselves, I can't even think the initials, perhaps you know what it is, that they're calling themselves some matriarch conference or something like that, and they were saying that
I'm not familiar.
They were, in fact, I posted on Facebook just yesterday on a couple of pages. I saw it posted, but they were saying that their estimation is that 80% of the people that they've talked to support the gas line going through, which gets to the point that I brought up in the last show, that if 20% oppose it, then it shouldn't go through. I mean, this isn't. Most of our in our territories, we deal with issues. We don't just form a majority. We don't let the majority rule. We need to have consensus. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about free, prior, and informed consent, you need to have consensus to approve a project, but not necessarily consensus to oppose one. And so, yeah. I mean, and look, and that's not a new standard or a strange standard. Look, you have people all the time who may bring a lawsuit, one individual bring a lawsuit to stop something. It's because all of the people aren't being taken into consideration on certain things. And look, you can have the majority of people who live in these Canadian constructed native villages in a territory that could care less about a pipeline going through what they consider the wilderness, because they aren't the ones who are manning trap lines, who are living in those areas. And so you can have this situation where large segments of the population can consider some of their own people sacrifice zones or sacrifice people, and I think that's the reason that when we talk about free, prior, and informed consent, it isn't the consent of governmental officials. It isn't the consent of the majority. It should be a consensus that allows some of the things that have the potential to negatively impact land and people for generations.
I think that also there was this really another good post that was put on Twitter earlier by an Indigenous woman named April Holder, in which she said 4,633 people have died from COVID-19 worldwide. There were 5,712 Indigenous women and girls that went missing or were murdered in 2016 in the United States. One of these is getting international news coverage, and the other doesn't impact white people's lives.
Well, and
that is so important.
Well, and look, Reggie and I talked about the sticker that one of these morons in Canada created that had Greta Thunberg on it, and and the sexualization of her, and that got a lot of attention. Amnesty International weighed in on it, but here's the thing. Greta Thunberg's getting all this attention because of a drawing that was made of her, and yet we have thousands of 5,000 women who are not accounted for. I mean, so you're right. There's disproportionate levels of concern that play out. And we always see Native people, people of color, again, marginalized people, the Two-Spirit people, who are always going to be marginalized and are never going to draw the attention. Look, getting back to the AIDS epidemic, until it started contaminating the blood supply, and when people could just associate AIDS with the gay plague, then it was fine. It wasn't until people who weren't started contracting. I mean, it's the same thing when you look at things like the heroin epidemic. When you could relegate drug use to the people that were fed these fed a lot of this substance abuse consumption into their communities because of money, and meaning like the crack cocaine or heroin or any of that stuff.
Absolutely.
That was, but when all of a sudden
by the government,
when white kids started they started hitting the white suburban neighborhoods, then all of a sudden, we don't need to punish them, we need to treat them. So all of a sudden, drug use became a disease rather than a crime, and it's only because of who became impacted last, and that's what we see all the time.
I also want to note that if anyone who's listening to this does use drugs in any way and is in need of harm reduction sources, there are some really great online resources about how to use drugs safely in a time of coronavirus, and I would urge y'all to look at that because that is also incredibly important. I think that harm reduction is the most viable option in order to provide folks with addiction a safe space in order to get healthy. So please know that there are some really great informative zines and websites as well right now on like how to be able to use safely in this very unsafe time.
Well, and to your point, I mean, what's going to happen with all the attention being put and shifted towards coronavirus is that people are going to neglect other issues. And I think this is why I think we have to be real careful. I mean, by all means, give this its due. Give this the attention that it deserves. But try not to ignore all the other issues that we face. I mean, we still have violence against women. We still have children that are abused. We still have a homeless population that is incredibly underserved. We have all of these things. And look, we can shift our attention towards coronavirus, but we should not necessarily remove all the attention to these other issues that need to be addressed, including what you're talking about. Sure.
I mean, it would be a disservice, and is done purposefully. I will also remind y'all that at the top of the hour we will be taking phone calls, so please call in at 212-209-2877.
All right, and Reggie, are we going to do a news break here at the top of the hour as well?
I think so. I'm just getting it up right now. I'm just taking a listen.
All right.
Well, no, it looks like it look like it's not happening.
Okay,
So,
all right. Well, we'll take
continue.
We're going to keep chatting through this.
we'll take it to the top then.
Yeah, we don't. I know that, something that's important to know as well with dealing with any sort of, fear-mongering tactic, not to say that this isn't something to take seriously, but it is always meant to be a distraction against larger issues. Don't let these, I know that the news waves and the airwaves rather are taking, we're taking up space talking about Corona. It's not a not important issue. We need to be speaking about it, but also there are still injustices happening, and this isn't an excuse to just pause on that. We must continue to fight for Wet'suwet'en. We must continue to fight for our Black and Brown communities that are going to be the most largely affected by a pandemic. And it is our duty to continue. Maybe we need to shift and reconsider the tactics that we use. What does it look like, as I said previously, to do direct action in a time where we can't take to the streets? And I don't think we've ever really had to think about that. And I don't know if there's a successful option. And I hope that people call in and provide maybe some suggestions. But there's more going on in the world than just this. It is important. We need to talk about it, and we need to continue to talk about it. But there are still things happening that are going to greatly affect specifically Black and Brown communities.
Well, and when you talk about the idea, that some of the stuff can be used for fear mongering, that kind of thing. The biggest concern I have is what you mentioned earlier, when people can target a certain people and say that they're the reason or they're the cause.
Yes,
so whether you're talking about the Asian population or the Chinese population within, and of course, most Americans can be so ignorant, even when they attempt to identify other people, that you can take some of the stuff out on people, and there's no reason to do that. I mean, this is not, something that you can target a group of people over and say, well, either treat them differently or to to build some biases against. So that's the kind of thing that I think we have to really be careful when. Look, there are reasons for concern here, but there's no reasons for hate here. There's no reason for taking this thing to a place where, and I know it gets politicized. I realize that, and look, there are people concerned about what it's going to mean as the Democrats are fighting each other for office. There are people who are concerned. There's all kinds of other ways that people can spin this thing. But you know what? We need to not take our eye off of the things that are really, really important. And I'm not, look, I know people are really hyped up about, election 2020. And, you and I are kind of the rare breed that know that we're not going, our impacts on that are negligible. So while we talk about it and we address it to some extent, we also know that we have a personal fight that we have to take to so many out to so many fronts. And like you said, I think we've got to figure out, well, how do we take those challenges forward when you have this ominous thing happening, that overshadows everything. Overshadowing something and is one thing, but trying to eliminate us from the other battles that we're charged with. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on. And look, it is necessary to prioritize. And we get into this battle. I know for folks like myself and some of the folks like Donna and Ann and some of these folks who are so much involved in the mascot issue, we always get confronted with the issue that says, well, but that's such a low priority, and why aren't you talking about mental health, and why aren't you talking about conditions and stuff like that? But for those of us who manage to involve ourselves on many facets of social injustice, realize that most of these things don't operate in a vacuum; that they're connected. You can't talk about women's issues. Frankly, you can't talk about women's issues without even talking about the Two-Spirit issues, because it's some of the same kinds of gender biases that come into play. It's the same kind of violence that comes into play. So you can't take any of these things and think that they are boxes with firm walls that you can compartmentalize every aspect of the issue. So I think it's important that we stay engaged. like you said, I think we have to figure out ways that we stay engaged that may, take into consideration, aversion to large groups and that kind of thing. But, you know, there are plenty of people who found excuses not to get engaged before. Don't let
Yes,
this be one of them
absolutely.
for those of you who are engaged. So.
All right. Well, we have a call on the line, so let's take our first call. Hey, caller. Thanks for tuning in. Where are you calling from? What's your name?
I'm right down here in Brooklyn, Janine. Let me predict. Am I being misinformed that this occurred with people eating animals like bats and stuff? So therefore, I mean, there are people that eat these. And am I being like misinformed because I heard that?
I think that there have been some rumors flying around related to that, but I don't
know if they're rumors.
I don't know if it's been confirmed.
It hasn't been confirmed yet. That's one of the many rumors that has been.
It's a rumor.
Yes.
It's a rumor. Okay, because I'm one that will not be eating. I'm serious. I mean, I've heard and well, it is what it is. Nutrition is everything. We do have to keep our bodies as sound as we can nutritionally. But I mean, eating meats and all that. But these, certain people are, I heard, cooking bats and stuff. So I'm sorry.
I think that's people eat whatever they need to eat, and people eat different kinds of things. Just because we don't eat it here doesn't mean it's wrong.
We don't need to eat bats.
Well, some people
want
do.
To eat bats can eat bats.
Some people do need to. I mean, that's the reality, and
why
there is
somebody needs to eat a bat
because it's food.
Because that's where they live.
We can
that
eat off the land and be very healthy eating off the land.
Yeah, but
I'm about vegetarianism.
To judge what other cultures have incorporated into their diets, though. Well, there is, but here's the thing: there is a sense that many of these viruses do come from animals, and then from animal to human, and then from human to human. The issue right now isn't about somebody getting a virus from a bat. Right now, this is about human-to-human transmission. So wherever this thing, however it started, and look, there will continue to be good research, and some not so good research trying to determine the origins of these things. But at this point, that's not even the factor. I mean, because you can eat a vegetarian diet and still, if you could still have the virus laying on the surface of a vegetable. So that's the whole point. You have to deal with what's at hand right now, and regardless of whether this originated from a diet that seems foreign to an American, that's almost not even the point at this point.
You can eat whatever you need to eat, whatever you need access to, whatever you want. It's not based, cultural differences. Sure, eating what you eat is irrelevant to the conversation. A lot of the food that is consumed here stateside is grotesque, and I think that associating corona to consuming bats and then demonizing people eating that is, in fact, just racist. So on that note, we're going to move on to our next caller.
Well, first, this is WBAI New York, 99.5 FM, and you're listening to Let's Talk with John Kane and Regan.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'm just here to.
No,
I'm helping
Reggie,
you.
Thank
I'm
you
just helping.
so much.
I'm just helping. Okay.
All right, next caller. What's your name? Where are you from?
Hi, Thomasina from Bergen County.
Hey, Thomasina.
Here's a couple. Hi, everybody. Here's a couple of my thoughts. We're really seeing right now, we're seeing right now how capitalism is being prioritized above everything. Everybody's talking about, like, trade and the stock market. I don't give a damn about any of that.
Yeah.
I don't care if I can't eat a mango for the next 5 months. I really don't. What I'm concerned about is the lack of analysis on this. And I hear your conversation. I mean, I have to be quite honest. The host, I think it's the female host today.
Oh, yeah, this is Regan.
Hi, Regan. you're a little bit quick to judge. I like to say this about that situation. That we're having is because of overdevelopment, and there could have been a problem because we're cutting down their natural habitat. So it's not necessarily about what you eat; it's what we're doing in terms of development and how we're ruining the whole life cycle of animals and humans. So there could be something connected to what somebody ate, but the bottom line is this: all people care about trade and work and stuff like that. I don't care about any of that. You know, like, I just wish people would understand, if you don't have your health, you have absolutely nothing. It doesn't matter what cars you have, what job you have. None of that matters if you don't have your health. So we are now in a crisis where we have tens of millions of people in the United States of America with no health care. That's what we really need to be talking about now. And then we have somebody like McConnell who's stopping any kind of help that could actually go to people that need help. They're worried about businesses losing money. Come on. The businesses all have insurance. The reinsurance businesses are one of the most profitable in the world. So every business has insurance. And if they don't, I'm sorry. I don't feel sorry for them. There are people that go bankrupt every single day, and nobody seems to care about that. So the businesses, well, too bad. What I'm saying is this: we need to do an analysis on the fact that because we didn't close stuff down because of trade, because of business, and I just left the school that we just closed for, they say it's a snow day. I think we're closed. We sent everybody home with their laptops. I work in the Teaneck School District. We have now been sent home with instructions for possible, future homeschooling. Well, I'm really upset about that. I think we should have done something a long time ago. And I'm wondering, like, when we start to test, Angela Merkel is saying that 70% of Germany will have the virus, which means 70% of America is going to have the virus, and we're not even prepared for it. So I think we need to start talking about how we make somebody like McConnell accountable. That guy needs to be run out on a rail, whatever that saying is. So I'm sorry, I'll stop there.
Well, for one thing, being in New York, or you probably have nothing to do with trying to hold McConnell accountable, because the way the system works, disproportionate amounts of power go to people who are supported by relatively small groups of people. This isn't just about capitalism. This is about seeing the flaws in every system. And look, you can't talk about a global pandemic and not talk about the impacts that it's going to have on trade, that it's not the impact that it's going to have on work and how people feed themselves. Where the laptop's going to come from, and where the tablet's going to come from if people do need to be homeschooled. Look, there's a lot of this stuff that's connected. And look, I have no problem addressing the issue related to food, but the likelihood is this has less to do with what somebody eats than the fact that there has been an ever increasing effort to drive people into huge urban populations, both in the United States and globally. You look at some of these cities, the province where this where they assume this virus started. The immediate area was over 6 million people, but then the outlying areas was 60 million people. That's people being packed into small areas. So a lot of these food markets, what they call wet food markets, they exist because people have been literally shoved into these urban environments, and they aren't living off the land. So it's nice to talk about living off the land, but how many people in New York City are doing that, for crying out loud? It's all
don't have access to that.
Well, and
most people
exactly.
Go ahead.
And so my point with all this stuff is, it is all related, and certainly I don't think I'm not going to condemn anybody for talking about the politics in here, but there is the always going to be the risk of politicizing something in a way that is not accurate or appropriate. But no, I think to hold politicians accountable is something that we all should have a bigger effort to do. But the thing is, the system is flawed, and we see it play out not only in the election cycle cycle that we're experiencing right now. But
Absolutely.
the disproportionate amount of power that southern states have because of electoral college and rural areas have because there are wealthy people there that a lot of this stuff goes right back to slave era. The fact is that every state in the United States has 2 senators, regardless of the population. That already skews a disproportionate amount of power to to some of these lower populated states. And so guys like Mitch McConnell have the power that he shouldn't have if it were anything even resembling what people think is a democracy. So I think it's look, by all means, there should be a lot of public outcry against some of the people who have abused authority. And this current situation, oftentimes, you can see the connection between what people are going to experience because of this coronavirus and the failure of adequate political systems.
Absolutely. Thomasine, thank you so much for your call. We're going to go on to our next caller. Hi, caller. What's your name and where are you from?
My name is Ben from Jersey.
Hi, Ben. How you doing?
Pretty good. I want to say I love you guys' show.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Just wanted to say, no problem. Just wanted to say, I'm glad you guys brought the whole thing how previously and just throughout history, there have been things that have been weaponized before. Genetic and biological agents, like you said, smallpox. So that's been proven. It's not a conspiracy theory. So not to say that this is that, but it's not wrong to consider that or to think on that level. But I want to also say is, like the U.S., New York had a lot of time to look at China, what was going on there. And there's really no incentive to get these tests in because New York has not been tested. So nobody knows what's going to take place when the tests actually do come in. Because that's, like you said, it's a lot of money. I think they said that this test is going to be like $3,000 or $2,000 each.
Dang. And I'm assuming that's without health insurance. And even with health insurance, what does that look like?
That's true. Very true. And that's not even considering the wait you got to pay for the ER just sitting there.
Yeah.
You know what that is. You might go sit for $5, come out with an $8,000 bill. So there's no incentive to really get the test. I also wanted to ask a question. Maybe you guys know this because I've seen online a small amount of times. Like, is there an agency or some type of oversight committee or department that regulates like private individuals who have like access to unlimited resources that do things like genetically modified mosquitoes and release them? Because that's something that was done in Brazil I was reading about. I've never seen that in the mainstream news. I don't think I'll ever see it. And they're supposed to be doing that in West Africa. I think it was the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is doing that to get rid of malaria. But how is that legal to do that? Is that something that the FDA oversees or the CDC? Like, what body or agency oversees that? I know it's not directly related to corona, but it is kind of on the same topic.
I honestly
it seems like something can go wrong because who wants to get bit by a mosquito that hasn't been tested long term?
I feel like, I personally have no idea. I would assume the World Health Organization or the CDC, but I have no idea. Especially in New York City.
Well, and one of the problems with a lot of this advanced genetic stuff, CRISPR and the use of all these things to modify things is, different countries have different standards, and so it makes it even more difficult because there's also money involved. So people will advance the technology, think that they're gonna capitalize on it literally, and so that's difficult. So you make a good point. Back to the idea of weaponizing a disease or a virus or a bacteria. Look, it doesn't mean that these things aren't naturally occurring. Anthrax was weaponized; it occurred naturally. Smallpox was weaponized; it occurred naturally. And this may very well, and I believe probably occurred naturally. But it doesn't mean that that it doesn't get used not just as a political weapon, but it also, and this gets back to what Regan and I were saying, is we have to be careful not to fall into socially weaponizing some of this stuff as well. So but I think we do have to consider the possibilities.
Right. Yeah. My last point too. I know we see what goes on when Trump gets on TV and when people get on various TV, the politicians, and make their speeches. their talking points, but you never really know what's taking place at the top of the pyramid when leaders are flying back and forth to meet with each other. So it could be a war that's taking place. You never know what's going on. At the same token, you never know what's going on. You never know if somebody threatens somebody else. I'm gonna do this to you, blah blah blah. And people fight battles in different ways. I mean, based on your status in life. Billionaires fight different from drug dealers on the street. So this can be an all-out war that could be, and the people who are suffering could be casualties of that war.
Reggie and I in the studio just pulled up the mosquito genetic testing that you were referring to, and we're trying to see who oversees this. But I have a feeling that it's more of a who has the money oversees this, and it's going to turn out to be less regulated than you would expect.
Mm-hmm. It's a private endeavor.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Ben. Thanks so much for your call. We've got another caller on the line. Hi, caller. What's your name and where are you from?
Yeah, I'm Mark from the Bronx. Thank you.
How you doing?
Hey, Mark.
I'm doing well, and thanks a lot. And thanks for the previous callers. Fantastic information. I like to just throw in a little 2 cents, if I may, about decoding things and doing critical analysis and looking at what's in front of you. Do y'all know that on the Fantastic and Lysol labels, right? Mm-hmm. You use Fantastic and Lysol products?
I do not, but what does they say on the label?
Okay, let me give it to you real quick. Both of those companies, Fantastic and Lysol, these are billion-dollar chemical companies, mm-hmm. right? Right? That's correct, right?
Yeah.
Okay. On the front label, it says the same thing. It says kills 99.9% of bacteria and viruses. Mm-hmm. On the back of the label, they put on there human coronavirus is one of them that kills it. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean anything? I would say yes, my dear. It means that they are in cahoots with the people that are really doing this in a chemical warfare manner.
Why would, just because these products kill coronavirus, why does it mean they're in cahoots with them? I don't quite understand this one.
You don't understand?
No.
All right. It'll make sense when you pick up a bottle of Fantastic.
No, I've read the labels, but you understand that coronaviruses have been around for decades. So the idea that
stop right there.
What?
Not right there. So why is everybody and their grandma saying there's a new virus?
Because this is a new coronavirus. This is a new virus within that family of viruses. It's the COVID-19 is different than what SARS was or the MERS was. The common cold oftentimes is transmitted by a strain of coronavirus. So the fact that bleach or Lysol or alcohol, the hand sanitizer will kill the virus or bacteria, that's nothing new. The fact that they listed coronavirus was a direct result of the previous coronaviruses that created somewhat of these epidemics. So the MERS and the SARS. That's why it's on the label. I mean,
I have a Clorox wipe thing right in front of me, and it does say that it does work against the human coronavirus. But yeah, I think that it's important to note that coronavirus has existed for a long time. It's COVID-19, which is a specific strain that is new.
And this will kill those products will kill COVID-19. But just because it kills the virus on a surface or on your hands doesn't mean that they have a cure for it. I mean, there's a difference between being able to kill something and being able to cure something. And I think that's
that really leads me to my point. Again, it leads me back to the origin of what's the hubbub about this. We've been in the tens of thousands every year, and nobody seems to care about it. Everybody just saying, "Oh, well, it's part of life," or you get a cold and you die. Now, it's some urgency to shut the whole world down. No,
Well, this is a new strain of a virus that has a higher mortality rate than 10 to 15 times higher mortality rate than the flu. So everybody throws all those other numbers. Oh, this many people, 50,000 people or 30,000 people die annually of the flu. Yeah, and that's with a couple 100 million people getting it. But if this ever reaches that level of people being sickened or carrying this thing, then you're talking about a death rate or a mortality rate at 10 to 15 times higher than that. The other thing about this virus is that if you don't take that Clorox wipe or that fantastic spray and clean a surface, it happens to live for a little bit significantly longer than some of the other surface viruses can live on a surface. So this is part of the concern. So I think to draw the attention to this thing and understanding that, you certainly want to address this issue now about the mortality rate of this thing and its ability to spread before. I mean, there's no sense in waiting until 200 million people have it or 70 million people in Germany or wherever else. I don't think the caution, I think if anything, the confusion over this thing. I mean, look, somebody posted something on there that says if you drink bleach, you can cure yourself. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that gets put out there. I mean, when Trump says this will go away in April because it gets warmer, look, there's no evidence that this virus is going to go away if the temperatures. It may not like heat in the excess of 80 degrees. And dry, with lower humidity, but we're not going to see temperatures like that until summertime, and that doesn't, and not every place is going to see those, and there are cool, moist places for like subways where some of this stuff can stay for quite some time. So it is a concern, and I know I saw all the posts over and over again about has to be a conspiracy because this isn't new because they've had it on the Lysol label all this time. But I think it's important for people to realize that coronaviruses are a family of viruses that have been around for a long time. This is
just a new strain.
They got really labeled as human coronaviruses with MERS and SARS, but it is the source essentially for a family of coronaviruses is what causes the cold. That's why we don't have a cure for the cold. The other thing that people asked is if you have this thing and then you survive it, are you immune? And you got to go back to what the common cold. People, once they get through a cold cycle, they may be immune for a very short period of time, but that doesn't mean most people have caught a cold or the flu multiple times. You don't build up a long-term, inoculation from this stuff, immunity to this stuff. So I think this is, again, part of the disinformation, that's out there. And I think it's important to be critical. Critical thinking and to be cynical or skeptical.
Yes.
But at the same time, understand that once you ask that question, it may get answered, and if you reject the answer, then you're really hung up on the question.
All right, well, on that, let's go to our next caller. We have one person waiting on the line. Hi, caller. Where are you calling from, and what's your name?
Hi. I'm from South Dakota.
Oh, thanks for calling. What's up?
Well, a couple things. One of the things that people aren't talking about, except for, the thing that concerns me the most is, what is the incubation period of this disease? And the reason I'm asking is because we got people that want to come and bring in donations in to our reservation with cleaning supplies and all that for flood victims, because we've had one community has been in stagnant water since last July or last May. Wow. And so they've been bringing stuff in for, just to combat the black mold and all that stuff. But it's like we have a travel ban, and I started thinking, well, yeah, it's nice that these people want to bring these things in to help us, but how do we know that they're not bringing the disease to us?
I think that's a difficult thing to ask, and must be so difficult for y'all to be navigating, because I've seen reports of the incubation period. Some people were like, oh, it's 14 days, but then earlier, about 15 hours ago, it was released that it could be up to, it could be as soon as 2 days. So I know I've seen research kind of all over the place. Some are 5 days, some are 14 days, some is 27 days. So I feel like the incubation period is varying dependent on the person.
Well, and there's also incubation period. There's also an incubation period that is associated with carrying and even being able to transmit the disease before you feel any symptoms. And what one of the things that I read was that by the time you're starting to feel a sore throat or any kind of shortness of breath, you've probably been carrying the thing for over 5 days. So the incubation period, from what I understand, is between 5 and 14 days. But that doesn't mean if you breathe something in and it's in your lungs, you can before you start feeling the effects of that, you can be breathing it back out immediately. So you can transmit something almost immediately just by touching something, picking it up on your hand. So it's difficult. You can't just rely on people who are sick to be the only telltale sign of whether somebody has it or not. And that's part of the difficulty on this. I think anybody who is in a situation where they are having outsiders come into a community for very good reasons, I still think there has to be a certain level of precaution, and obviously you can look at areas where's the stuff coming from. There are hot zones. I mean, New York City and New York State has more of these cases than any other state in the United States. So you've got to consider something that's coming out of New York. Like I said, the gentleman who just tested positive in Rochester rented a car from New York and drove home in a car from New York. He didn't have a whole lot of interaction with people, but simply by being in a car that somebody who was probably in that vehicle before that left the virus, on the surfaces there. So it is a concern.
Pat, do you think that these supplies could be mailed to y'all instead?
Well, see, they're bringing in furniture now. And see, then there's this other thing of, my friend just called me. She's from South Carolina, and she got in contact, or somebody contacted a motel in Florida who was getting rid of all of their beds and all of that stuff, and offered her them. So my first question is, well, wait a minute, were they all wiped down?
I mean, I would definitely wipe them down again, just in case.
But the other thing is that we're a small reservation. I live in a town of 655 people.
Yeah.
Monday, I saw a news article that there are 5 cases in South Dakota. One of them is from our reservation, our IHS.
Oh, wow.
Now, the next day, we get a news article said that they're presumed cases because the CDC has to verify and confirm that they're real. So in the meantime, Monday we have one person that has the virus, and we found out, him and his wife went to Las Vegas, and that's where they picked it up. So now we have his little report going to the CDC for verification. And yesterday, 4 more cases popped up. 2 children and 2 more adults. One happened to be his wife. So now we're having to wait for those cases to be confirmed by the CDC. How many more people are going to are going to go down? So even that hierarchical process is also detrimental and is spreading the disease.
Well, this is the other problem is having to rely specifically on CDC. Look, we have health clinics in a lot of our communities, but this is what people don't understand about this idea of these test kits. Regardless of the expense, there are 300 million people in the United States, and thus far, only about 1.5 million test kits have been produced, and they're saying that there may be another 6 million test kits available soon. But that's still a small percentage of the overall population, and so then the question becomes, well, who gets to be tested, and frankly, because you can transmit the disease while you're still asymptomatic, it's hard to judge who warrants and who justifies being tested and who doesn't. And this is all part of the difficulty, and that's where some of these things are not questions that are easily answered.
And then I also heard that it takes you have to test them twice in order to confirm it. Mm-hmm. So they have South Dakota has 1,900, or I don't know, I'm bad at math, but anyway. After you break it down, there's only 800 test kits for the whole state.
Yeah, I think that these test kits are going to, especially let's see how quickly these test kits can get to the reservation. All right, Pat, thank you so much for your call. We're going to take a break here. This is WBAI Let's Talk with John Kane and Regan. Please call in with your questions at 212-209-2877. All right, welcome back to Let's Talk with John Kane and Regan. That's me. John's not in the studio today, but he is with us remotely. Hey there, pal.
Hi. I am in I'm in my Let's Talk native studios, which are on the Seneca territory of Cattaraugus. This is where I do my twice weekly show normally, and I occasionally do my show, the New York show from here when situations arise. This wasn't one of the ones I anticipated, and I will say,
of course,
the whole idea of doing the show remotely, it's good that we can do that. And I'm really grateful that I have you, Regan, there in Brooklyn to at least sit in with Reggie. So there's at least some person to person interaction there in studio. It makes it easier to do the phone calls and look. I want to thank all the callers that we've had thus far. I do want to remind people that we stream this show. The show broadcast live on WBAI 99.5 on the FM dial. It streams live on www.wbai.org. And then I stream the show also, video of the show. A little difficult. I've got Regan. Well, not right now. I actually got the coronavirus popped up on the screen behind me. But
we're watching you actually.
Okay, but I am video streaming. Although unfortunately I can't have Reggie and Regan in the stream. But we are streaming on Facebook. I know we have a fair number of people who listen, if not view, through Facebook. So we will continue to do that. I don't know how long we're going to continue this. I don't anticipate being back in the New York studio at least until probably mid or late April, but we're gonna have to see how this plays out. But we will do the show each week, one way or the other, and
absolutely.
And we'll make sure that we try to not just look. I'm not going to do a coronavirus show every week. That's not the plan.
Oh no, we've got other things to talk about.
There's a lot of other things to talk about, and it's not to say that there isn't going to be a piece of this that's part of the conversation. Obviously, I had to explain why it is that I'm not in studio. It's part of one of the things that is so different about the show that we do there is the fact that I travel from a native territory, and it's an 8-hour trip, 8 hours plus to get there, and I make that trip every week to do the show. So I got to explain, and I had to explain why. But look, there are a lot of pressing issues, and we talk about. We try to offer a native perspective to the issues that affect us all, but oftentimes we do try to enlighten people about issues they simply don't know anything about. I do want to remind people that my plan was that I was going to host an event at the Commons next week. That's obviously canceled. We won't do anything for the month of March. We'll still plan on doing something for the month of April. It'll probably be a film screening of some sort. But we'll keep you alerted and notified on what we plan to do. But for now, this is it. We're gonna continue to do our program. Let's Talk on WBAI every Thursday from 3 to 5 p.m. And again, this show in particular, I thought it was important because I know there's a lot of people in New York who have different thoughts and different ideas about what this pandemic means, and it has only yesterday was was labeled a global pandemic by the World Health Organization. I think it was probably could have been considered that beforehand. But this has impact. It has impact on a lot of things.
Yeah.
Everything from people's jobs. We talked at the very beginning of the program, the complications involved with kids in school. And while we're always told as parents or grandparents, for that matter, to keep your child home if they're sick, for two reasons. One is because they're sick, and the other is you don't want to get others sick. But the problem is when you face something this large and at this scale, you realize that there are children who oftentimes rely on the school lunch and in some cases breakfast, those being the most nutritious meals they get in the day. And look, I'm not condemning anybody's financial situation or whatever else, but that's just the reality. We also know the fact that kids go to school, free parents up to oftentimes do for their jobs and for the work that they do. When I was a kid, there was nobody ever heard of a latchkey kid. Do you know what a latchkey kid is?
No, I actually don't.
Oh, okay. The latchkey, it became this term for a child who basically goes home after school with a key tied around their neck, so they can go in and essentially take care of themselves for the couple hours it takes before they're.
Of course,
so
yes.
That's
because their parents at work. Oh,
right.
Yes, of course. I was like, what?
But it's one thing.
I totally know what you're talking about.
It's one thing for a child.
Calls.
Okay, yeah, but there's one thing for a child to be home for a couple of hours after school, after having had that stable environment, regardless of how people feel about public schools. But it's another thing for a child to have no guardianship because especially if they're homesick, and that's why this thing is so disruptive to so many lives. All right, go ahead. We'll go back to some calls now.
All right, let's go for it. Hi, caller. What's your name and where are you from?
Hi, this is Donna from Langhorne.
Hi, Donna.
Hi, Regan. Hi, John.
Hey, how you doing?
I wanted to put good. I wanted to put this out there. It's kind of a crazy perspective that like germs are living beings just like us, and sometimes they're destructive to their host just like us.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, just the natural order of things. And now when we have something like this and people are so upset, maybe it's a time to open your eyes and see what we as human beings are doing to our environment, to the planet, and how nature will take care of. I mean, it's sad to say that sometimes a lot of people die from things because it's like there's just too much. The world can only handle so much. And that's like kind of my natural way of looking at things. Now, that being said, my mom lived in a retirement community, assisted living, and I don't know if Don remembers that last month she was in the hospital. She was very sick. We didn't know if she was going to make it. And it was a respiratory thing that she gets, every once in a while. This time it was really bad. We thought she was going to die. And I don't think that she was tested for corona, and I don't remember it being even discussed then. And I wonder, did she have corona? And I traveled back from Hawaii on an airplane next to a girl who was sick, who kept a blanket over her head the whole time as she coughed. And I've been fighting a cold. I mean, at one point it was really bad, respiratory, and now I fought it, but I'm still totally kind of, congested. And at what point do you go get tested, and is there tests out there? And, and some of us will just have the body that can fight these things.
Yeah.
But it's just such a mysterious thing at this point because we just don't know what we're dealing with and how it's going to affect people. In my mom's assisted living community right now, they've shut it down. Like, they're on lockdown. We are not allowed to go visit my mom. But, there's care workers there. And they're saying, in general, they're saying don't wear a mask unless you're sick. You've got care workers who are going home and maybe going to, shop or, and they can't afford to be out of work or if they feel like they have a cold. So it's a very it's just crazy. Like they are keeping me out from seeing my mom, but the person who's taking care of her could be getting her ill.
Yeah.
It's just a very mysterious thing.
A couple of things, Donna. For one thing, if you experienced flu-like symptoms this year, it is possible that it was the coronavirus. I mean, and this coronavirus, this thing, it was identified back in December, and obviously there was no travel restrictions early on, so it's entirely possible if you had a flu-like symptoms. One of the things that I did hear is that this one does not present itself with a runny nose. So I don't know if that's one way to distinguish, I guess. It does have congestion, but and obviously shortness of breath, diarrhea, and that kind of thing, sore throat, but not necessarily a runny nose. But yeah, there will be some people who never will be tested. I mean, it's crazy. In the United States, the last count that I heard was 8,000 people were tested. No, there were 8,000 tests administered. Some of those might even have been duplicated because, like Pat said, some people thought you had to be tested twice. So only 8,000 total. In South Korea, in the month of February, they were testing 10,000 people per day. So let that settle in a little bit. It shows you the difference in the difference in the elevation of concern that the health organizations in the two countries, how much disparity there is there. On the other point that you mentioned, and I'm glad you did bring it up. I mean, I'm not. There are many people who like to label things as good and bad. Good versus evil, sinister, all of these things, right? But most of nature is neither good nor bad. I mean, the whole construct of evil and evil doing is a man-made construct. Now, that's not to say that there aren't some things that cause harm. I mean, gravity causes harm. People fall down. There are, within the food chain, there are people, or there are some species that devour other species as part of the food chain. When we don't think about the role that bacteria or virus plays in the food chain, but they really are in that food chain. And it is, look, as much as I hate, hearing, somebody diagnosed with cancer is neither good nor evil either. In fact, cancer it has been kind of proven out to be, oftentimes caused by the activity of man, whether it has to do with us consuming, carcinogens or what we've done to the air and the water and so much of the environment. Mm-hmm. And you're right. When you think about something like these bacterial and viral infections that that affect the world, it isn't about payback. It isn't about karma, but it is about some of these things happening. Again, this may very well have been caused because of the way man has chosen to live its life in terms of packing people up into these urban environments. Like I said, these large wet markets that existed in Hunan province exist because you have a very consolidated, tight population, that's packed into a small area. So when you do that, it's the same thing that the plagues of Europe. A lot of those plagues of Europe came from people packed into cities and not having sanitary conditions with the way they dealt with sewage and that kind of stuff. So
they were just throwing their poop out a window. Okay?
Exactly. I mean, and you had to walk through it in the streets and that kind of stuff. So there was a lot of really terrible things that now looks terrible. But you know what? People, the societies of the time thought they were fine. So I agree with you. There is a natural nature takes its course on some of this stuff. Now and I don't look at nature as this arbiter of justice, but it is in the language, our language, we have a word called skana, and people say that it means peace, but it's about balance. And when things get out of balance, then there's nature has a way of balancing things out. Now, I'm not saying this is about depopulation or mitigation of overpopulation, but you know what? The disease itself may be the result of man's behavior or some other natural phenomenon. And that could be almost any disease. Right. You can track it back to some something in nature that either caused or generated it.
Right, and And these viruses or germs are always going to mutate, and they're going to do whatever they have to do to survive. And as we come up with inoculations and treatments, they're going to mutate so that they can survive. It's just a natural thing, a natural way for them to survive in whatever conditions we provide.
Oh, and to be clear, there is no treatment for the coronavirus. I mean, all that anybody can have done is have the symptoms, batted back, fever, more oxygen. The whole idea is that the human body is the only thing that can fight off the virus. We have no known cure. There's no vaccine developed yet, and in fact, many of these vaccines for flu vaccines, they have to change from year to year because, like you said, these viruses, just like the rest of nature, they evolve. The fact that this was probably a virus that began in an animal, and then was able to mutate enough to survive from an animal to a human transmission, and then mutate a little bit farther so that it could continue to adapt to be transmitted from human to human. That's all part of the natural process.
Right, and I would hope that this would be a wake-up call, because there's so many people being affected now, that we need a better way for our food to be processed, a better way for our food to even live before it's processed. And, because that's all going to come back to us. I mean, I am a vegetarian. I don't push that on anybody else. It's the way I choose to live because of the way animals are treated and the way they're processed, and I just want to stay away from that. And if I had the opportunity to buy, an animal that was, lived a good life and processed on a farm and, all that, I would eat that. I mean, I have chickens, I eat their eggs. I know where they come from. And I know that everybody doesn't have that opportunity, but it's time to fight more for better conditions for our food before it becomes our food. If people need to learn something from this, now that more people are being affected and it's crossing all lines, it's not just affecting poor people. People need to use their voice and stand up and demand that government protect us better. We need to be healthier.
Well, and
take care of our earth.
This, these kinds of incidents do certainly make a good case for vegetarianism. However, here's the problem: if you don't know where your vegetables come from, part of the romaine lettuce scare and I was going to
say E. coli.
It's E. coli because they were using animal wastes for fertilizer and that kinds of thing. So, most of these kinds of viruses are coming from animals of some sort, whether human or otherwise. They aren't coming from vegetables. We managed to contaminate them by the mass production and the way that these things are handled and not just processed but distributed. So and this is part of the challenge. I mean, this show is broadcast from New York City. Most people in New York City have no opportunity to play a substantial role in being responsible for where their food comes from, and they're totally dependent. Even I heard somebody say that there's not even enough grocery stores for people to buy raw food to cook. I mean, the population is so large in New York City that you're not only going to have to depend on somebody to give you the raw materials for food, but most people are going to have to eat out a significant number of times in a week. Just because of the infrastructure.
I think that if anything, this is just adding fuel to the fire that we need to dismantle capitalism completely. Just wanted to thank Donna for your call. I think it was a really important, good point. And we have one more caller on the line. Caller, what's your name and where are you calling from?
Peter, and you gave me the best lead-in when you mentioned balance. It is about balance, because what I was going to mention is this reminds me of, remember that film in 1982, Koyaanisqatsi? Do you remember it? It was mostly images with music by...
With the Philip Glass music.
Glass. Absolutely, right. And it was called Koyaanisqatsi. I was told it was the Hopi Indian word meaning life out of balance. showing the difference between our break from the natural world to the modern life. But I just Googled it, and it's more profound than that, because it says from the Hopi dictionary, it says that Kianascati means moral corruption and turmoil. Which is so insightful. Of course, moral corruption precedes life out of balance. You know what I'm saying? The Hopi Indians.
Well, and again,
I've never seen this film.
I'm not familiar with
it,
but I certainly will look for it. Reggie will send me a link to it, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's an amazing film. It's a bunch of images and music, but it's amazing how the music and images coalesce with each other. They kind of integrate with each other. It's a narrative without a narrative.
Oh, I love that.
Well, and again, the
up and slowed down.
Part of the issue here is
slow and
the antithesis of nature happens to be man. And in almost all cases. So, I mean, when people think about something that's natural as opposed to man-made, I mean, because we have somehow aborted or undermined nature. So we actually call the distinction between something being natural and something being man-made. And what does that say about us?
I think that, I also think it's important to note that I'm nervous about this conversation that a lot of this is happening because we live in urban environments. And the reason I say that is because, pre-contact, pre-settlers on indigenous land, we lived in cities as well. And so I know that this urban environment currently is nothing we've ever seen before because it's so tied with capitalism and industry and this idea of industry and industriousness. But I think it's also really important to note that, pre-contact, we also had cities. We also lived in large populations.
I want to mention this, though, because that didn't bode well for us either. Most of those larger, Cahokia and some of these other, they didn't perish because of European contact. So I always say this: we made some of the same mistakes that people on other parts of the planet made. I mean, there were a lot of complications associated with Chichen Itza and some of these other places. Because when man, regardless of whether you're native in South America or Central America or North America or wherever, if you stake your life on defying the natural order of things, then you are pitting yourself against nature. And we made the same mistakes if you look at if you charted history, you would see how Native people returned to the egalitarian and the agrarian societies even after some native peoples did some of these larger, more densely populated areas. So I'm not blaming white people for the whole idea of cities, because we did the same thing and they didn't work out that well for us either.
Yeah. I guess I personally am always a little nervous of this narrative that we, pre-contact lived in this utopia that was, all this land, because we also did exist in cities, and now
I bring that up too.
I wonder how. And I now wonder how cities, even pre-contact, impacted our lives. But I'm just so thankful we had such a great conversation. We are at the top of the hour. John, any final words?
Well, we'll be back next week, and so regardless of what happens, even in a worst case scenario where Regan has to dial in, we will continue to do the show on a weekly basis, one way or the other. So you'll find us on WBAI 99.5. You'll find us on the website streaming live at www.wbai.org, and of course we'll stream it on Facebook. We'll also put it up as a podcast, and we'll put it up as a YouTube video. So if you don't catch us live, you can catch us after the fact. So look forward to, hopefully we can expand a conversation beyond coronavirus for next week. But who knows? We'll have to see how things play out. I want to thank you, Regan, for being in studio. I want to thank Reggie, and I look forward to next week.
All right. Thanks all. Wash your hands.